He was her everything, the man she vowed to love in sickness and in health. But when she needed him most, when she was bringing their child into the world, he laughed. That single cruel sound shattered more than just her heart. It forged a will of iron. Fast forward 5 years. She's not the weeping woman he remembers. She's the master of a sprawling mansion, a self-made millionaire. And him. He's standing at her gates not as a husband, but as a guest about to learn the devastating price of a heartless laugh. This is the story of how a single moment of cruelty can change everything. The fluorescent lights of the delivery room hummed a monotonous, sterile tune, a stark contrast to the chaotic symphony of pain radiating through Amelia's body. Every muscle screamed, every nerve ending was a live wire. Sweat plastered her dark hair to her temples, and her breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. For 17 hours she had been locked in this primal battle, her body a vessel for a miracle that felt more like a medieval torture session. Across the room, her husband, Richard, shifted his weight from one foot to the other, his face a mask of bored impatience. He'd been supportive at first, holding her hand, whispering what he probably thought were encouraging words. But as the hours dragged on, his patience had worn thinner than the hospital-issued gown she wore. He'd started checking his phone, sighing dramatically, and making ill-timed jokes that fell flat in the tense air. Can you just rub my back? Please." Amelia gritted out her voice, barely a whisper. The pain was a relentless wave cresting higher and higher, and she felt like she was drowning. Richard looked up from his phone, a flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "Again, I just did that, honey. The nurse said it could still be a while. Please." She begged, the word tearing from her throat. It's really bad." With an exaggerated sigh, he pushed himself off the wall and shuffled over to her bedside. His touch was clumsy perfunctory, a far cry from the tender caresses he'd once showered her with. It was the touch of a man fulfilling an obligation, not a partner sharing in a profound, life-altering experience. They had met in college, a whirlwind romance straight out of a storybook. He was the charming, ambitious business major, and she was the bright-eyed art history student captivated by his confidence and grand plans. He'd promised her the world, a life of comfort and security, and for a while he'd delivered. They married a year after graduation, and he quickly climbed the corporate ladder at a prestigious financial firm. Amelia, at his urging, had put her own career aspirations on hold to create the perfect home, to be the perfect corporate wife. She hosted his colleagues, remembered their birthdays, and smoothed over his social gaffes with her innate grace. She was the wind beneath his wings, a role she had accepted with love and devotion. Now, as another contraction seized her, a guttural cry escaped her lips. She squeezed her eyes shut, her knuckles white as she gripped the bed rails. I can't do this." She sobbed, the fear and exhaustion overwhelming her. "Don't be so dramatic, Amelia," Richard said, his voice laced with an unnerving detachment. "Women have been doing this for thousands of years. It's natural." His words were a slap in the face. Natural. This agony felt anything but natural. It felt like her body was being torn asunder. She needed his strength, his compassion, his unwavering support. Instead, she got platitudes and a lecture on the history of childbirth. The doctor came in then, her expression calm but firm. "Okay, Amelia, it's time. On the next contraction, I need you to push with everything you've got." Summoning a reserve of strength she didn't know she possessed, Amelia did as she was told. She pushed until stars exploded behind her eyelids, until her throat was raw from screaming. And then, in a moment of sheer, blinding agony, she lost control. Her body convulsed, and a strange, involuntary sound, a mix between a groan and a grunt, erupted from deep within her. And that's when it happened. Richard laughed. It wasn't a small chuckle, a nervous titter. It was a full-throated, unrestrained laugh, laced with a derisive edge that cut through the haze of her pain. He pointed at her. His face crinkled in amusement. "Did you hear that? You sound like a wild animal." Time seemed to stop. The hum of the lights, the encouraging words of the doctor, the frantic beating of her own heart, it all faded into a deafening silence. The only thing that existed in that moment was the sound of her husband's laughter, echoing in the sterile room, a cruel, mocking testament to her vulnerability. A profound and chilling clarity washed over Amelia. In that single, heart-shattering moment, the man she had loved, the man she had built her life around, ceased to exist. In his place stood a stranger, a man who could find humor in her suffering, who could mock her at her most primal, most exposed moment. The love she had so carefully nurtured for him, the years of sacrifice and unwavering support, all of it curdled into something cold and hard in her chest. A new kind of strength born, not of love, but of a chilling, resolute fury surged through her. With a final primal scream that had nothing to do with the pain of childbirth and everything to do with the birth of a new, unshakable resolve, she gave one last monumental push. And then the room was filled with the lusty cry of a newborn baby. "It's a girl," the doctor announced, her voice warm and congratulatory. They laid the tiny, wriggling creature on Amelia's chest, and as she looked into the impossibly dark eyes of her daughter, she made a silent, solemn vow. She would never again be in a position where she had to beg for comfort. She would never again allow herself to be made small by a man who saw her strength as a spectacle for his amusement. Richard, his laughter having subsided, stepped forward, a proud, fatherly smile now plastered on his face. "She's beautiful, Amelia, just like her mother." Amelia didn't look at him. She couldn't. The sight of him made her stomach turn. She just held her daughter, her tiny, perfect daughter, and whispered, "Hello, Olivia. It's just you and me now." The laughter had stopped, but for Amelia the echo of it would linger forever, a constant burning reminder of the moment her world broke apart, and the moment she began to piece it back together on her own terms. The love story was over. A story of survival, of revenge, of a woman's indomitable will to rise from the ashes of a shattered heart, was just beginning. The first few weeks at home were a blur of sleepless nights, endless feedings, and the constant, overwhelming needs of a newborn. The sprawling suburban house that had once felt like a symbol of their success now felt like a gilded cage. The silence between Amelia and Richard was a tangible entity, a third person in their marriage, cold and unwelcome. Richard, for his part, seemed oblivious to the chasm that had opened between them. He played the role of the doting new father, posting endless photos of Olivia on social media, boasting to his friends and colleagues about his beautiful daughter. He'd come home from work, kiss Amelia on the cheek and ask in a perfunctory tone, "How was your day, honey?" Amelia would murmur a non-committal response, fine or tiring, her eyes never meeting his. The laughter in the delivery room had severed something vital between them, a cord of intimacy and trust that could never be reattached. She looked at him and saw not the father of her child, but a stranger who had mocked her at her most vulnerable. The memory was a festering wound, and his every touch, every casual endearment was like salt being rubbed into it. He tried to initiate intimacy to bridge the gap with physical affection, but Amelia would flinch away, feigning exhaustion or a headache. The truth was, his touch repulsed her. The memory of his laughing face was superimposed over every loving gesture, turning it into a grotesque parody. How could she share her body with a man who had treated her pain as a joke? The nights were the hardest. While Richard slept soundly beside her, his breathing even and untroubled, Amelia would lie awake, Olivia sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, and a cold, hard knot of anger would tighten in her stomach. She would replay the scene in the delivery room over and over in her mind, the sound of his laughter, a phantom echo that haunted the quiet hours of the night. It was in these dark, lonely hours that the seeds of her future began to germinate. She had given up her dreams for him, poured all her energy and creativity into building his world. And for what? To be ridiculed in her moment of greatest need, the anger she realized was a powerful fuel. It burned away the last vestiges of the naive, trusting woman she had once been leaving in its place a steely resolve. One night, as the moon cast long shadows across the bedroom, she slipped out of bed and went to the nursery. She stood over Olivia's crib, watching the gentle rise and fall of her tiny chest. A fierce, protective love, more powerful than anything she had ever known, washed over her. She would build a world for this child, a world where she would never be dependent on the whims of a man, a world where she would be safe and secure. The next morning, something in Amelia had shifted. The fog of postpartum exhaustion had lifted, replaced by a crystalline clarity of purpose. While Olivia napped, she didn't scroll mindlessly through social media or watch daytime television. She went to her long-neglected home office, a space that had been more of a storage room for Richard's old college textbooks and sporting equipment than a place of work. She dusted off her old laptop, the one she'd used for her art history thesis, and the screen flickered to life, a beacon in the dim, cluttered room. Her fingers at first hesitant, then with growing confidence flew across the keyboard. She started researching, delving into the world of online businesses, e-commerce, and digital marketing. Her art history degree, which Richard had often dismissed as useless, had given her a keen eye for aesthetics, a deep understanding of historical trends, and a knack for storytelling. She realized she could leverage these skills in the digital marketplace. She started small, creating a curated online boutique selling vintage-inspired home decor. She used her art historian's eye to source unique, beautiful pieces from flea markets, estate sales, and obscure online vendors. She photographed each item with an artist's sensibility, staging them in her own home, creating a narrative around each piece. Her product descriptions were not just lists of dimensions and materials. They were stories weaving in the history and craftsmanship of each object. She named the boutique the Gilded Cage, a private, bitter joke that fueled her ambition. To the world, it was a chic, sophisticated brand. To her, it was a constant reminder of what she was fighting to escape. Richard barely noticed her new preoccupation. He saw her on her laptop and assumed she was playing on the internet, as he dismissively called it. He was too consumed with his own world, his own career, to pay much attention to his wife's little hobby. The first sale came a month later, a modest purchase of a set of antique teacups. Amelia watched the notification pop up on her screen, her heart pounding with a thrill she hadn't felt in years. It was a small victory, but it was hers. and it was a taste of the independence she craved. The sales started to trickle in, then flow. Her keen eye for trends, her elegant branding, and her compelling storytelling resonated with a growing audience. She reinvested every penny she made back into the business, expanding her inventory, upgrading her website, and learning everything she could about search engine optimization and social media marketing. She worked in the stolen hours of the day while Olivia slept, or in the dead of night while Richard snored beside her. The house was her warehouse, the garage her shipping department. She was a one-woman army, fueled by coffee ambition and a burning desire to prove him wrong. One evening, Richard came home from work, tossing his briefcase onto the sofa with a weary sigh. "Tough day at the office," he announced, loosening his tie. "The market's in a slump. We lost a major client." Amelia, who was in the midst of packaging an order for a hand-painted Italian vase, looked up, a strange sense of detachment washing over her. His world of high finance, which had once seemed so important, so all-consuming, now felt distant and insignificant. "That's a shame," she said, her voice neutral. She sealed the box with packing tape, the sound a crisp, definitive rip in the quiet room. He looked at her, then a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. He noticed, perhaps for the first time, the stacks of boxes in the corner, the meticulous organization of her workspace. "You're still doing this thing?" he asked, a hint of condescension in his tone. "Are you actually making any money from it?" Amelia met his gaze, her own eyes cool and steady. "Enough," she said, her voice quiet but firm. She printed the shipping label and affixed it to the box. In that moment, she wasn't just a wife and mother. She was a businesswoman, an entrepreneur, the silent architect of a new life, a life that was slowly but surely diverging from his. And he, in his arrogance and self-absorption, was completely oblivious to the fact that the foundations of his world were beginning to crumble. The gilded cage was about to be broken open, not by force, but by the quiet, relentless work of the woman he had so foolishly underestimated. The next 2 years passed in a whirlwind of dual realities. To Richard, life continued on its predictable, comfortable trajectory. He went to the office, he played golf on the weekends, he attended PTA meetings where he'd charm the other parents with his easy smile and confident demeanor. He saw Amelia as the dutiful wife, the devoted mother, the woman who kept his home running like a well-oiled machine. He noticed she was on her laptop more often, that the garage was becoming increasingly cluttered with boxes, but he dismissed it as a harmless, time-filling hobby. He was the breadwinner, the one whose career mattered, the one who provided for their family. Her little online shop was in his mind, a quaint diversion, something to keep her busy while he conquered the world of finance. He was living in a world of his own, making a comfortable illusion that was about to be spectacularly shattered. Amelia's world, in contrast, was a hive of activity, a parallel universe humming with the energy of creation and commerce. The gilded cage had exploded. What had started as a small, curated collection of vintage home decor had morphed into a full-fledged lifestyle brand. Amelia had expanded into artisanal furniture, handcrafted textiles, and a line of organic small-batch candles and soaps. Her eye for quality, her impeccable taste, and her genius for marketing had tapped into a zeitgeist of consumers hungry for authenticity and beauty. She was no longer a one-woman army. She had a small, dedicated team of remote employees, a customer service representative, a social media manager, and a logistics coordinator. The garage had been abandoned in favor of a rented warehouse space, and the hum of her laptop had been replaced by the constant ping of new orders, emails from suppliers, and messages from her growing team. She had become a master of compartmentalization. During the day, she was mum taking Olivia to the park, arranging playdates and reading bedtime stories. But the moment Olivia was asleep, she transformed into the CEO of her burgeoning empire, a sharp, savvy businesswoman who negotiated contracts, analyzed sales data, and made high-stakes decisions with a cool head and an iron will. The money, at first a trickle, had become a torrent. She had opened a separate bank account, a secret ledger of her success. She watched the numbers climb with a grim sense of satisfaction. It wasn't about the luxury, it was about the freedom. Each dollar was a brick in the fortress she was building around herself and her daughter, a fortress that Richard, with his casual cruelty and oblivious arrogance, would never be able to penetrate. The first crack in Richard's carefully constructed reality appeared on a Tuesday evening. He came home from work, complaining about a deal that had gone south, and tossed a stack of mail onto the kitchen counter. Bills, bills, and more bills, he grumbled. The cost of everything is going up. Amelia, who was calmly sipping a cup of tea, glanced at the mail. On top of the pile was a thick, glossy magazine, a high-end publication dedicated to interior design and entrepreneurship. On the cover, in a stunning, professionally shot photograph, was a woman with dark hair, a serene smile, and eyes that held a universe of secrets. It was her. The headline in bold, elegant font read, "Amelia Sterling, the silent titan of e-commerce, turns vintage charm into a multi-million-dollar empire." Richard stared at the cover, his mouth slightly agape. He picked it up as if it were a strange, alien object. He looked from the photograph to his wife, who was watching him with a calm, unreadable expression. "What is this?" he asked, his voice a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "It's a magazine," Amelia replied, her voice even. They did a feature on the gilded cage. A feature he stammered, flipping through the pages to the lavish multi-page spread. There were photographs of her products, testimonials from ecstatic customers, and a detailed account of her business's meteoric rise. The article lauded her as a visionary, a marketing genius, a woman who had single-handedly built a brand that was redefining the landscape of online retail. It mentioned her multi-million-dollar empire. Richard sank into a chair, the magazine spread out on the table before him. He read the words, but they didn't seem to compute. Multi-million-dollar empire. This was his wife, the woman who organized his sock drawer and reminded him of his mother's birthday. How could she be this titan? I don't understand, he said, looking up at her, his eyes wide with a dawning, horrified comprehension. When did this happen? It's been happening for a while, Richard. Amelia said, her voice devoid of any emotion. You just weren't paying attention. His mind reeled. The late nights on her laptop, the endless stream of packages, the hushed phone calls he'd overheard, it all clicked into place, forming a picture he had been too self-absorbed to see. He had been living with a stranger, a woman who had built an entirely separate life, a wildly successful life, right under his nose. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over him, shock, confusion, and a bitter, resentful jealousy. He had always been the successful one, the one with the high-powered career. The unspoken agreement in their marriage was that he was the star, and she was the supporting cast. Now the roles had been dramatically, irrevocably reversed. Why didn't you tell me? He demanded, his voice rising. It wasn't a question born of genuine hurt. It was an accusation, a protest against this sudden, unwelcome shift in their power dynamic. Amelia took a slow, deliberate sip of her tea before answering. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in a long time. She saw not a partner, but an obstacle. A man whose ego was so fragile that her success was a threat to his identity. "Tell you what, Richard," she asked, her voice dangerously quiet, "that I was building a future for myself and our daughter, that I was creating a life where I would never have to depend on a man who could laugh at me in my moment of greatest pain. I didn't think you'd be interested." The mention of the delivery room, a topic that had been buried under years of silence, hung in the air between them, a toxic, radioactive cloud. Richard flinched, as if he'd been struck. He had no defense, no comeback. He had laughed. It was a fact, an indelible stain on their history. And in that moment, he realized that he had not only lost his wife's love, but he had also lost her respect. And in the face of her quiet, formidable success, he felt a new, unfamiliar emotion. Fear. The ground beneath his feet was no longer solid. His world, the one he had so carefully constructed, was beginning to feel like a house of cards in a hurricane. And the hurricane had a name, Amelia Sterling. The magazine article was not just a revelation. It was a cataclysm. The carefully maintained facade of the Sterling family life crumbled overnight, exposing the deep, irreparable fissures beneath. Richard, once the undisputed king of his castle, found himself a bewildered and increasingly irrelevant figure in a world that was being reshaped by his wife's silent, relentless ambition. He tried to reclaim his position, to insert himself into her success. "We should celebrate," he declared a few days after the magazine came out. His voice a little too loud, a little too jovial. "I'll book a table at Le Ciel. Tell all our friends. We can make it a party for the Gilded Cage." Amelia looked up from her laptop, where she was finalizing a deal with a high-end hotel chain to furnish their boutique suites. "There's nothing for us to celebrate, Richard," she said, her tone cool and dismissive. "This is my company." The "we" in their marriage had become a you and a me, two separate entities with diverging paths. Richard's attempts to co-opt her success were clumsy and transparent. He started name-dropping the Gilded Cage at his office, trying to bask in the reflected glory of her achievements. "My wife, the entrepreneur," he'd say, a proprietary pride in his voice that made Amelia's skin crawl. But the world saw the truth. The magazine story had made Amelia a minor celebrity in the business world. Invitations to speak at conferences, to join exclusive networking groups, to sit on advisory boards poured in. They were addressed to Ms. Amelia Sterling, not Mrs. Richard Sterling. He was a footnote in her story, a detail from her past, not a partner in her present. The financial disparity between them became a chasm. While Richard's career in finance was respectable, it was bound by the traditional structures of salary and bonuses. Amelia's income was exponential, a force of nature that was rewriting their financial landscape. The tipping point came 6 months after the article was published. Amelia called a meeting, not in their sterile, silent living room, but in the sleek, minimalist boardroom of her new corporate headquarters, a stunning, light-filled space in a trendy downtown loft building. Richard arrived feeling like an outsider in his own life. He was ushered into the boardroom by Amelia's personal assistant, a sharp, efficient young woman who looked at him with a polite but distant professionalism. Amelia was already there, seated at the head of a long, polished concrete table. She was dressed in a tailored, power-red dress, her hair swept back in an elegant chignon. She looked formidable, a woman in complete command of her world. "Richard, thank you for coming," she said, her voice formal, as if addressing a business associate. "Amelia, what is this?" he asked, gesturing around the impressive room. "Why are we here?" She slid a thick folder across the table towards him. "I'm buying a new house," she announced, her voice even. and I'm filing for divorce." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. Divorce. The thought had crossed his mind in fleeting moments of anger and frustration, but he had never truly believed it would happen. He was Richard Sterling. People didn't divorce him. He opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were the legal documents, cold and official, and a glossy real estate brochure. The property featured was not a house. It was an estate. A sprawling, contemporary mansion nestled in the most exclusive, secluded enclave in the state, overlooking the ocean. It was a palace of glass and steel, with an infinity pool that seemed to melt into the horizon, a private cinema, a wine cellar, and acres of meticulously landscaped gardens. It was a world away from their comfortable but ultimately unremarkable suburban home. You're buying this," he stammered, the scale of her wealth, of her ambition, finally hitting him with its full, crushing weight. "I've already bought it," she corrected him. "The sale closed last week. I paid in cash." Cash. The word hung in the air, a testament to the vast, unbridgeable gulf that now separated them. His entire net worth would barely cover the property taxes on a place like this. "And the divorce?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What about Olivia?" "The terms are all in there," Amelia said, gesturing to the legal documents. "They are, I believe you'll find, exceptionally generous. I'm not asking for a cent from you. I will, of course, have full custody of Olivia. You will have visitation rights, every other weekend, and alternating holidays." Every other weekend. The words were a death sentence to his vision of family, of fatherhood. He would be a visitor in his own daughter's life. "You can't do this, Amelia," he pleaded, the bluster and arrogance stripped away, leaving only a raw, desperate fear. "We're a family." Amelia's mask of cool professionalism finally cracked, and for a fleeting moment he saw the woman he had married, the woman whose heart he had broken. Her eyes blazed with a fire that had been smoldering for 5 long years. "A family," she repeated, her voice low and trembling with suppressed rage. "Where was this family when I was screaming in pain, bringing our daughter into the world? And you were laughing at me. Where was this family when I was up all night, building a future for our child? While you slept oblivious. You didn't want a family, Richard. You wanted an audience. You wanted a support system for your own ego. You just never realized that the person holding up the stage was the one with the real strength." She stood up, the meeting clearly over. "The movers will be at the house next week. They will pack your belongings and deliver them to an apartment I have leased for you downtown. It's fully furnished. You'll be comfortable." She was managing his exit from her life with the same ruthless efficiency with which she ran her business. He was being downsized, outsourced, made redundant. "So that's it?" he asked, a hollow feeling spreading through his chest. "I'm just dismissed." Amelia walked to the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the city, her back to him. "No, Richard," she said, her voice softer now, laced with a weary finality. "You're not dismissed. You're a guest. You will be a guest at Olivia's birthday parties, a guest at her school plays, a guest in the life we have built without you. You are welcome to visit, but you don't live here anymore." He left the boardroom in a tool, the heavy folder clutched in his hand. As he walked through the bustling open-plan office of the Gilded Cage, he saw the vibrant creative energy, the collaborative spirit, the world his wife had built. It was a world that had no place for him. He had laughed at her in her moment of weakness, and in doing so he had rendered himself obsolete in her moment of strength. He was no longer her husband, no longer her partner. He was about to become a guest in the magnificent, sprawling mansion of her success, a solitary figure rattling around in the empty echo chamber of his own regrets. The laughter had finally truly stopped, and the silence that followed was the sound of his world ending. The mansion was even more breathtaking and more alienating in person. The first time Richard drove his sensible sedan up the long, winding driveway, flanked by ancient oak trees and manicured lawns, he felt a profound sense of dislocation. His car seemed comically out of place, parked next to Amelia's sleek black Tesla in the cavernous four-car garage. A housekeeper, a polite uniformed woman who introduced herself as Mrs. Gable, greeted him at the door. "Sterling and Olivia are by the pool," she informed him, her tone professional but not unfriendly. "Please make yourself at home." But how could he make himself at home in a place that felt more like a modern art museum than a house? The ceilings soared to impossible heights. The walls were vast expanses of white, punctuated by large, dramatic canvases of abstract art. The furniture was minimalist and exquisitely expensive, each piece a statement of taste and wealth he couldn't begin to comprehend. He walked through the echoing open-plan living space, his footsteps unnaturally loud on the polished concrete floors. He felt like an intruder, a trespasser in this new rarefied world his wife and daughter now inhabited. He found them by the infinity pool, a shimmering sheet of blue that seemed to stretch into the endless expanse of the ocean beyond. Olivia, now a bubbly, bright-eyed 6-year-old, shrieked with delight as she splashed in the shallow end. Amelia was reclining on a lounge chair, reading a book, a wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the sun. She looked serene, untouchable, a goddess in her own private paradise. "Daddy!" Olivia cried, her face lighting up as she saw him. She scrambled out of the pool and ran into his arms, dripping water all over his work clothes. He hugged her tightly, burying his face in her wet hair, a surge of love and loss washing over him. This at least was real. This connection was the one thing he hadn't completely destroyed. "Hi, Pumpkin," he said, his voice thick with emotion. Amelia looked up from her book, a cool, polite smile on her face. "Richard," she said, her voice carrying easily in the still air. "You're early." It wasn't an accusation, but it wasn't a welcome either. It was a simple statement of fact. He was a visitor, and his arrival was a scheduled event. His weekends with Olivia became the focal point of his life, but they were always tinged with the bitterness of his new reality. He would pick her up from the mansion, a place where he was always greeted with polite deference, but never with warmth. He would take her to his small, sterile apartment, a place that felt temporary and soulless compared to the vibrant, love-filled world she inhabited with her mother. He tried to be the fun dad, taking her to amusement parks, zoos, and museums. He bought her expensive toys, hoping to buy her affection to compete with the sheer scale of the life Amelia provided. But Olivia, with the simple, unerring wisdom of a child, didn't care about the money. She just wanted her parents. "Why can't you live here with us, Daddy?" she asked one evening as he was tucking her into her bed in the guest room of the mansion, a room that was larger and more luxuriously appointed than his entire apartment. The question was a knife in his heart. It's complicated, sweetie," he stammered, unable to meet her innocent, questioning gaze. How could he explain that he had forfeited his right to live here with a single heartless laugh? How could he tell his daughter that he had failed her mother in the most fundamental way? He started to see Amelia not just as the woman who had left him, but as the woman she had become. He attended Olivia's school events, sitting a few rows behind Amelia, watching her interact with the other parents and teachers. She was confident, gracious, and deeply involved in her daughter's life. The other mothers looked up to her, admired her. The fathers were a little in awe of her, a little intimidated. She moved through the world with an effortless grace and power that he had never seen in her before. One day he arrived to pick up Olivia and found Amelia in her home office, a stunning glass-walled room that overlooked the ocean. She was on a video call, her voice firm and decisive as she negotiated the terms of an international distribution deal. He stood in the doorway, unseen, and listened. She was brilliant. The shy, accommodating art history student he had married was gone, replaced by this formidable, razor-sharp CEO. A sickening realization dawned on him. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost the opportunity to be a partner to this incredible woman. He had been so blinded by his own ego, so convinced of his own superiority, that he had never truly seen her. He had seen a reflection of himself, a supporting character in his own story. He had never seen the Titan hiding in plain sight. The final crushing blow came on Olivia's 7th birthday. Amelia had thrown a lavish party, a fairy tale affair with a real pony, a magician, and a mountain of presents. Richard arrived, a brightly wrapped gift in his hand, feeling more like a distant relative than a father. He watched from the sidelines as Amelia and Olivia, both dressed in flowing white dresses, moved through the party, the twin centers of this happy, sun-drenched universe. They laughed together, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed in the vast open spaces of the mansion. Later, as the guests were leaving, he found Amelia in the kitchen overseeing the cleanup. "It was a beautiful party," he said, his voice quiet. "Thank you," she said, not looking at him. "Olivia had a wonderful time." "Amelia," he began, his voice cracking. I am so sorry." She finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Sorry for what, Richard? For laughing? Or for not believing in me?" "For everything." He whispered the word, a confession of 1,000 small and large sins. "For not being the man you deserved, for not being the father Olivia deserved. I was a fool. I see that now." Amelia was silent for a long moment, studying his face. The anger in her eyes had long since faded, replaced by something that looked almost like pity. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but firm. "You were. But your apology, Richard, it doesn't change anything. You can't unring a bell. You can't unhear a laugh. I built this life, this world for my daughter, not out of spite, but to protect her, to protect myself. I have no anger left for you. I simply have no space for you, not in the way you want." She turned back to the counter, her movements calm and deliberate. The conversation was over. He walked out of the mansion and into the cool night air. He got into his sensible car and drove away, the lights of the house receding in his rear-view mirror until they were just another star in the night sky. He was Richard Sterling, the man who had it all and threw it away with a single cruel laugh. He was a guest in his daughter's life, a ghost haunting the hallways of his wife's success. And as he drove into the darkness, the only sound was the echo of his own regret. A hollow, lonely sound that would follow him for the rest of his days. He had laughed when she cried, and now he was left with nothing but the silence. Another decade passed, and the world Amelia had built became an institution. The gilded cage was no longer just a brand. It was a global phenomenon, a benchmark for taste and aspirational living. Amelia Sterling herself was a household name, a subject of business school case studies, and a frequent though reluctant presence on lists of the world's most influential women. The mansion, once a symbol of her newfound freedom, had become her fortress, a sanctuary of serene, controlled perfection overlooking the turbulent ocean. Richard, too, had settled into a new, quieter existence. The 10 years had carved new lines on his face and stripped away the last vestiges of his youthful arrogance. He had left the high-pressure world of finance, finding a more modest and meaningful career as a financial advisor for a non-profit organization, helping families navigate debt and plan for their futures. He lived in the same comfortable, unremarkable apartment, a space that now felt less like a temporary stopgap and more like a home. The weekends he spent with his daughter were the unshakable pillars of his life. He never missed a single one. He was a constant, steady presence, a quiet counterpoint to the dazzling, high-powered world her mother provided. He was not the fun dad anymore. He was the listening dad, the one she called with homework questions, the one who taught her how to drive in his sensible sedan, the one whose silence was comfortable, not menacing. The fulcrum of their separate worlds was Olivia. At 17, she was a striking mix of her parents. She had Amelia's dark hair and thoughtful eyes, but Richard's easy smile and quick wit. She had grown up navigating the two starkly different realities of her parents' lives. She spent weekdays in the minimalist splendor of the mansion, a world of organic meals, private tutors, and curated experiences. On weekends, she was in Richard's world, a world of take-out pizza old movies and long, meandering conversations in the local park. She loved both her parents fiercely, but she was a child of the armistice born after the war was over, and she had never truly understood the reason for the profound, unbreachable treaty of silence that governed their interactions. The first crack in the carefully constructed piece appeared not with a bang, but with a college application essay. The prompt was deceptively simple. Describe a formative event in your life and how it has shaped your character. Olivia, a gifted student with a bright future, found herself staring at a blank screen. Her life from the outside seemed devoid of the kind of dramatic, character-forging events that make for compelling essays. It had been a life of privilege, of protection, of seamless comfort. The most significant event she could think of was her parents' divorce. But she had been too young to remember the cause and the official story she'd been given, that they had simply grown apart, felt thin and unsatisfying. Driven by a nascent journalistic curiosity and the pressing deadline, she began to dig. In the vast digital archives of the internet, she found what she was looking for. It wasn't the famous magazine article about her mother's success. It was an older, obscure blog post, a "Where Are They Now" piece on some of the city's up-and-coming financiers from over a decade ago. The article on Richard mentioned his recent quiet divorce and contained a quote from an anonymous hospital source who recalled the dramatic birth of his daughter. The source recounted the story of a young, arrogant financier who had laughed loudly and mockingly at his wife during the height of her labor. Olivia read the words, and the world tilted on its axis. The blood drained from her face. Laughed. Her father, her kind, patient, gentle father, had laughed at her mother while she was giving birth to her. It couldn't be true. It was just anonymous gossip. But as the initial shock subsided, a cold, sickening sense of certainty settled in her gut. It was the missing piece, the skeleton key that unlocked all the mysteries of her family. Her mother's impenetrable reserve, her father's quiet, almost penitent demeanor, the palpable, invisible wall that stood between them, even during the most cordial of handoffs. The gilded cage she had lived in her entire life suddenly felt fragile. Its bars forged not just from her mother's strength, but from a deep foundational wound. She didn't confront her mother. The thought of bringing this ugly, buried thing to the surface, of causing her mother to relive that moment, was unbearable. Instead, she did what any 17-year-old in crisis might do. She rebelled, not in any spectacular headline-grabbing way. Her rebellion was quiet, insidious, and aimed at the heart of the perfection her mother had curated. Her grades, once stellar, began to slip. She became withdrawn, sarcastic, her easy smile replaced by a guarded, cynical pout. She started spending more time with a rebellious art house crowd from school, returning to the mansion late, her clothes smelling faintly of smoke, her eyes holding a new defiant glint. Amelia, a woman who could anticipate market trends and deftly navigate hostile corporate takeovers, was completely blindsided by the insurgency in her own home. She tried to handle it as she handled everything with control and logic. She scheduled meetings with Olivia's teachers, hired a new academic advisor, and tried to have calm, rational conversations with her daughter that went nowhere. "What's wrong, Olivia?" Amelia would ask, her voice laced with a frustration she tried to conceal. "If you need help, you just have to tell me." "Nothing's wrong," Olivia would reply, her gaze fixed on her phone. "I'm fine." The breaking point came when the headmaster of Olivia's exclusive private school called. He was deeply concerned about Olivia's sudden change in behavior and her academic decline. He wanted a meeting with both of her parents. The request sent a jolt of panic through Amelia. A meeting with Richard, not a brief exchange in the driveway, but a formal sit-down conference about their daughter's well-being. It was a scenario her fortress was not designed to handle. They met in the headmaster's oak-paneled office, the air thick with unspoken history. They sat in adjacent chairs, a foot of empty space between them that felt like a mile-wide canyon. Richard looked older, Amelia thought, but his eyes were clear and steady. He looked at her not with regret or longing, but with a simple, shared concern. The headmaster laid out the situation, his words painting a picture of a girl who was adrift, who was sabotaging herself. "She seems to be carrying a heavy burden," he concluded, looking from Amelia to Richard. "And she is pushing away anyone who tries to help." After the meeting, they walked in a silence to the parking lot. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows. "I think I know what this is about," Richard said, finally, his voice low. Amelia stopped her car keys in her hand. "What are you talking about?" "She found out," he said, his gaze unwavering. "About the delivery room, about what I did." Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. The one secret she had tried to shield her daughter from the ugly foundation upon which her empire was built was out. "How?" she whispered. "I don't know how. But I know my daughter. This kind of pain, this kind of anger, it has a source. And we," he said the word we, feeling foreign and strange, "are the source." For the first time in 16 years, Amelia felt the fortress walls begin to crumble. She had built a world to protect her daughter from the kind of pain and humiliation she had suffered, but in doing so, she had created a new kind of prison, a sterile environment where a wound like this could fester in silence. Her control, her greatest asset, had become her greatest liability. "What do we do?" she asked the question, an admission of defeat. She, the titan of industry, was asking for help from the man she had cast out of her life. "We can't fix this for her," Richard said, his voice imbued with a quiet wisdom she had never heard from him before. "But we can stop letting the past control the present. We can show her that people can change, that wounds can heal, even if they leave scars. We have to talk to her. Together." That evening, Richard didn't leave. Amelia, in a move that felt both terrifying and necessary, asked him to stay for dinner. They sat at the long, imposing dining table, the three of them, in a silence that was different from the ones that had come before. It wasn't empty. It was heavy with unspoken words waiting to be released. It was Olivia who finally broke it. "I read about it," she said, her voice small but clear, not looking at either of them. "Online. What happened when I was born?" Amelia reached for her daughter's hand, but Olivia pulled it away. Richard took a deep breath. "It's true, Olivia," he said, his voice raw with an ancient shame. "I did a cruel and unforgivable thing. I was a weak, arrogant boy who didn't know how to be a man, a husband, or a father. And your mother responded with a strength I couldn't comprehend. The life she built for you, this house, everything. It was her answer to my weakness." He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled not with the ghosts of their dead love, but with a profound, hard-won respect. "I have spent 17 years trying to become a man worthy of being your father. I have never for 1 second stopped being sorry for what I did." Tears streamed down Olivia's face. They were not tears of anger anymore, but of a wrenching, confusing sorrow. Amelia felt her own tears welling. She looked at Richard, the guest, the stranger, and saw him clearly for the first time in years. He was not the boy who had laughed. He was the man who had spent nearly 2 decades in quiet atonement. "He's right, Liv," Amelia said, her voice thick. "I built these walls so high to keep the pain out. I never realized I was also locking you inside with it. We have to find a way to talk about this. All of it. It was not a resolution. It was not a happy ending. The damage of that single cruel laugh could never be fully undone." But as the three of them sat at the table, the truth finally exposed to the light. The thick, unbreachable wall between them began to dissolve. The guest in the mansion had, for the first time, been invited in, not as a husband or a lover, but as a father, a partner in the messy, complicated, and necessary work of healing their daughter. The gilded cage was still standing, but for the first time, its door was open. The story of Amelia and Richard is a raw, unflinching look at how a single moment of disrespect can shatter a relationship and forge an empire. It's a testament to the quiet strength that can be born from profound pain. Amelia's journey from a heartbroken wife to a self-made millionaire isn't just about revenge. It's about reclamation. It's about taking back her power, her identity, and her future. Richard's fate serves as a chilling reminder that our actions, especially towards those we claim to love, have consequences that can last a lifetime. What do you think? Was Amelia's transformation justified? Could Richard ever truly be redeemed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories that will make you think.
Millionaire buys mistress luxury gifts. With pregnant wife's money, wife makes them both pay publicly. They were the couple everyone envied, wealthy, beautiful, and expecting their first child. The world saw Oliver and Charlene Cooper as the epitome of success, smiling at galas and making heartfelt speeches about family. Behind the scenes, however, a burning secret threatened to tear their carefully curated lives apart. Charlene's joy at soon becoming a mother was overshadowed by one devastating discovery. The luxury gifts her husband showered upon an elusive mistress were paid for with Charlene's own inheritance. Betrayal and scandal ignited a storm, and Charlene was prepared to fight back. But would she dare to expose Oliver, no matter the cost? Charlene Cooper was not just a socialite, she was the heiress to the Wilkerson real estate empire lineage that had solid footing in San Diego's property development sector for over 6 decades. The Wilkerson name was synonymous with old money, refined taste, and philanthropic work that spanned across California. Growing up, Charlene rarely heard a no. Her father, George Wilkerson, had doted on her, granting every request with a smile. Yet despite that gilded upbringing, Charlene carried a soft heart and a genuine desire to do good. When she met Oliver Cooper at a charity event in Los Angeles, their romance played out like a fairy tale. Oliver was a self-made businessman, known for an athletic build that hinted at his college football days and a confident smile that made him an instant crowd favorite. He had built a modest tech startup into a multi-million-dollar operation, impressing the city's financial elite. They fell in love fast, too fast, according to some cynics. But for Charlene, who believed in grand gestures and cosmic connections, their whirlwind engagement and wedding felt like destiny. Marriage brought new joys and new pressures. Charlene found out she was pregnant 6 months into their union, while Oliver celebrated the news publicly, calling himself the luckiest man on earth. Charlene began to notice subtle shifts in his demeanor. He worked later hours, made strange phone calls from the balcony, and sometimes disappeared for business trips on painfully short notice. Charlene's close friend, Laura S. Wilkerson, a distant cousin who had married into another wealthy family, tried warning her that something felt off. But Charlene didn't want to believe Laura's suspicions. Not Oliver, her dream man, the one who had vowed to protect and cherish her. He couldn't possibly betray her. Yet tiny fractures were starting to form. On the day Charlene's pregnancy test came back positive, Oliver had seemed distracted. The typical euphoria of an expecting father lasted mere hours before he slipped out for a supposed investor meeting. Over the next weeks, she saw less of him than ever. The staff at their Beverly Hills mansion began whispering behind her back. Charlene wasn't oblivious. She was heartbroken, but too afraid of the truth to dig deeper. It was her father's unexpected passing that truly opened her eyes. George Wilkerson's death left Charlene with a sizable inheritance, enough for Oliver to realize that Charlene's pockets were even deeper than he had initially understood. Charlene, unaware of the lurking vultures, told Oliver she had come into a great deal of wealth. She wanted to donate a portion to a charity that supported homeless pregnant women, but Oliver suggested they wait to ensure stable cash flow for upcoming expansions. It sounded wise at the time, so Charlene agreed to hold off her philanthropic dream. Still, something nagged at her. She discovered unread emails, unaccounted for expenses, and hush-hush charges on their joint account labeled under consultancy fees. Worst of all, she found receipts from high-end boutiques like Hermes and Cartier, extravagant purchases that she had no memory of, and certainly had never received. The final straw came when an alert from her bank informed her that an enormous amount had been withdrawn to pay for a penthouse lease in downtown Los Angeles. This transaction screamed secrecy, and Charlene's entire body trembled with dread. In the quiet hours of early morning, as she felt her unborn child gently kick within her, Charlene realized she could no longer turn a blind eye. She had to uncover the truth, even if it shattered her heart and destroyed the man she once believed was her soulmate. In the days following her discovery, Charlene felt like an actress in a film noir, her every step cautious, her every smile forced. She needed answers, but she couldn't just walk up to Oliver and accuse him blindly. Instead, she decided to use the resources at her disposal. She hired a private investigator named Jackson Miller, a discreet figure with an impeccable reputation for uncovering hidden truths among Los Angeles' high-profile elite. Jackson, with his salt and pepper stubble and calm, analytical demeanor, met her at a quiet cafe in Westwood. They spoke in hushed tones as Charlene handed him the suspicious receipts and transaction records. He asked pointed questions about Oliver's habits, the times he'd come home late, any known associates he might confide in. Charlene listened to Jackson's methodology, a plan to track Oliver's movements, record his financial dealings, and dig into phone logs if necessary. Days turned into a week. Charlene stayed up at night, mind racing, imagining the worst possible scenarios. She told herself she might be overreacting, clinging to a slim hope that the transactions were for something innocuous, secret anniversary plans, perhaps. Yet her instincts told her otherwise. When Jackson finally called, Charlene's heart nearly stopped. Meeting him again at the same cafe, she arrived early, nerves buzzing. Jackson sat across from her, an empathy in his eyes that made her realize he'd done this many times before. He slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were photographs of Oliver walking hand in hand with a striking brunette outside an exclusive boutique on Rodeo Drive. Another set of photos showed them picking out jewelry, with Oliver's arm confidently wrapped around the woman's waist. "She's Alexis Hart," Jackson said quietly, "a former runway model turned social media influencer. She has some moderate fame in the LA scene. She's known for her lavish lifestyle, usually financed by older, wealthy benefactors." Charlene's hands shook as she gripped the photos. The heartbreak was swift and brutal. She recognized the haute couture store in the background, places Oliver had never even invited her to. "There's more," Jackson added gently. "I discovered that the penthouse in downtown LA is in her name, but the payment route traces back to your inheritance account. I'm sorry. It was one thing to suspect a betrayal. It was another to see it displayed in undeniable proof. The pictures, the receipts, the joint property lease. Oliver was not just cheating on Charlene. He was using her father's money to do it. She felt her breath hitch, tears threatening to escape, but she forced them down. Charlene asked Jackson for everything: receipts, photos, timestamps. She paid him extra to collect any digital evidence he could find, from text messages to bank statements. If she was going to confront Oliver, she wanted an unassailable arsenal of facts. As she left the cafe, Charlene thought about her unborn child, the life forming within her. She recalled the day she had told Oliver the news. He had seemed so excited, so genuinely happy, yet how quickly that joy was overshadowed by this shameless affair. She realized she was no longer just a spurned wife. She was about to be a mother, and everything in her screamed that she had to protect her child from the toxic lies. Oliver brought into their home. That evening, Oliver returned late again. Charlene feigned sleep, carefully controlling her breathing so he wouldn't notice her tears or the heartache searing through her. As he tucked himself into bed, she felt the mattress shift with his weight, a weight that now felt heavier than ever. Deep inside, a new resolve began to form. Charlene would do whatever it took to ensure that justice was served, and she wasn't afraid to make it public if need be. Each passing day, the tension in the Cooper household intensified. Oliver acted more brazenly, sending text messages in Charlene's presence, stepping out for phone calls he labeled as urgent investor matters. A lesser woman might have confronted him immediately, brandishing evidence. But Charlene was no novice to power plays and feuds. She had observed enough corporate tussles in her father's company to know that timing was everything. In her father's study, a room lined with leather-bound books and old trophies, Charlene prepared her own strategy. Late one night, she laid out the evidence Jackson had collected: timelines, photos, and the sickening bank statements. She studied them like a general planning for war. She made sure to store duplicates safely with Laura Wilkerson, her trusted cousin, in case Oliver discovered her plans. Ironically, Oliver's behavior grew kinder during the day, as though he sensed her withdrawal. He started bringing her roses in an attempt to mask his guilt, or maybe to maintain the facade. He accompanied her to a routine prenatal checkup for the first time in weeks, acting every bit the devoted husband. The nurses at the clinic cooed over how lucky Charlene was to have such a supportive partner. The bitterness in her throat made it hard to swallow. One evening, Oliver suggested they dine at Spago in Beverly Hills, a place they often frequented during their courtship. Charlene agreed, thinking it might provide an opportunity to gauge his reactions. The hush of the Michelin-starred restaurant, the attentive waitstaff, and the candle-lit ambience all felt dreamlike. But beneath the surface, Charlene's anger simmered. Over foie gras and a meticulously prepared lamb dish, Oliver tried to discuss baby names. Charlene forced a smile, swirling her sparkling water while he sipped a vintage red. She asked him if everything was all right at work, if finances were stable. Oliver hesitated, quickly reassuring her that his tech ventures were thriving. "So we're still set on donating to that shelter project, right?" Charlene ventured, referencing her desire to support homeless, pregnant women. He coughed, face tight. "Yes, of course, but let's hold off until next quarter. I just need to ensure certain expansions go through." Charlene simply nodded, absorbing this new wave of deception. Her father's inheritance was being siphoned for Alexis Hart's penthouse and expensive tastes, yet Oliver continued to manipulate her philanthropic dreams. Back home, he went straight to shower, leaving his phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. Charlene's heart pounded. She told herself she wasn't the type to invade privacy, but the truth was already out there. She was dealing with a man who had no qualms betraying her. Nerves tense, she picked up the phone, scrolling through messages. Most were harmless business chats, but one thread stood out: Alexis. She opened it, scanning a conversation that made her stomach twist. Alexis bragged about their penthouse, how the city view from the balcony at dawn was worth every cent, how she'd love a new Chanel bag to match the latest couture she'd posted on Instagram. Oliver's replies were full of heart emojis and promises to fulfill her every desire. A wave of nausea overtook Charlene, more intense than any pregnancy sickness she'd felt before. She barely managed to exit the screen and place the phone back before Oliver emerged. He kissed her on the cheek, his lips cold to her now. All she could do was force a painfully fake smile and wait for the next move. That night, sleep evaded her. Memories of happier times replayed in her mind, their honeymoon in Bora Bora, dancing under the stars at a friend's wedding, the day. Oliver surprised her with breakfast in bed just to see her smile. She clung to these fleeting good memories, mourning the reality that such love was probably never real to begin with. But she also felt the shift in her soul. The heartbreak was solidifying into anger, and the anger was transforming into an unwavering resolve. Charlene knew that if Oliver had the audacity to use her money to fund his mistress's lavish lifestyle, she owed it to her father's legacy and to herself to make them both pay, and not quietly. A few days later, Charlene found herself staring at Alexis Hart's social media profiles. The woman was stunning tall, with an enviable figure, sultry green eyes, and perfectly styled brunette waves. Her Instagram feed was a curated display of luxury, private jets, high-end restaurants, and designer clothes from Paris. She had close to 1 million followers, drawn to her constant parade of opulence and aspirational living. Charlene felt a cold detachment as she clicked through pictures of Alexis flaunting the diamond necklace Oliver had purchased. She recognized it from the receipts. A brand new photo had Alexis perched on a velvet chair inside the downtown penthouse. The skyline behind her, the caption read, "Home, sweet home, filled with love and endless possibilities." She scrolled through comments from adoring fans, many praising her glamorous lifestyle and inspirational success. The irony was nauseating. Charlene thought of the heartbreak behind those shimmering surfaces, the lies fueling Alexis's brand. Charlene's father's money that was meant to be used for philanthropic work was going straight into Alexis's pockets. Deciding to gather more intel, Charlene used a fake social media account to follow Alexis's stories. She was stunned to see a recurring cameo, Oliver's hand, the same gold watch she had given him on their wedding day. Sometimes Alexis's live videos captured the muffled sound of Oliver's voice in the background. They thought they were being subtle, but for Charlene, it was a direct punch to the gut. Shortly after, Charlene discovered that Alexis was scheduled to attend a fashion event in downtown Los Angeles. It wasn't a massive public show, more a private preview for wealthy potential buyers. Charlene secured an invite through a friend, deciding it was time to see Alexis in person. The event was held in a swanky gallery, lights dimmed to highlight the models gliding down a makeshift runway. Charlene arrived in a classic black sheath dress that hugged her small baby bump discreetly. Despite her turmoil, she emanated poise, her posture straight, her chin held high. She spotted Alexis near the front row, surrounded by admirers. The mistress was elegantly dressed in a gold sequined gown, accessorized with the exact diamond necklace Charlene had seen on Instagram. Her laugh tinkled through the air as she relished the attention. Charlene approached cautiously, not wanting to cause a scene. She pretended to admire a piece of couture on display until she was near enough to hear Alexis's conversation with a friend. They gossiped about men, parties, and brand sponsorships. Alexis boasted about how her man was more generous than any sponsor she had ever encountered. Charlene's stomach twisted in revulsion, but she maintained her composure. One glance at Alexis's face, and Charlene felt an overwhelming wave of empathy for herself, for the unborn baby, for the life she had believed in. Alexis, for all her glamorous facade, seemed cunning, but not necessarily formidable. She was a symptom, not the root cause. Charlene's ire was saved mostly for Oliver, the man who had orchestrated this entire betrayal. Still, Alexis wasn't innocent. She was knowingly involved with a married man, and even flaunting the spoils of that affair. Before Charlene turned to leave, Alexis's gaze slid over her. Their eyes locked for a moment. Alexis gave Charlene a fleeting glance, perhaps seeing her as another wealthy guest, and then looked away without a hint of recognition. There was a moment's temptation for Charlene to walk up and introduce herself as Oliver's pregnant wife, but she resisted. She had bigger plans. A public meltdown at a fashion event might have satisfied a lesser impulse, but Charlene needed a carefully crafted retribution, one that would leave both Oliver and Alexis reeling in the most public way possible. When Charlene stepped out into the brisk night air, she felt the baby kick. A soothing wave of maternal protectiveness coursed through her. "Don't worry," she whispered softly, placing a gentle hand on her belly. "Mummy's got this." Fueled by the injustices she'd discovered, Charlene began assembling a legal and social strategy. She reached out to her late father's trusted attorney, Deborah T. Carmichael, an older woman whose steely gaze and impeccable knowledge of the law had guided the Wilkerson family through countless high-stakes disputes. Sitting in Deborah's glass-walled office, Charlene laid out the situation. Deborah, with her silver hair pulled into a neat chignon, listened intently, occasionally leaning forward to examine the evidence Charlene provided. After a lengthy pause, she said, "We have grounds for a significant lawsuit, embezzlement of inheritance funds, possible misappropriation, the list goes on. But Charlene, you need to be ready for a brutal fight. Oliver might not back down easily, and your personal life will be under public scrutiny." Charlene took a deep breath, feeling a tremor course through her. "I need to do this, Deborah. I won't let him or that woman continue to siphon off what my father left behind, and I need to protect my baby." Deborah nodded, taking down notes. "We'll move forward carefully. I'll assemble a forensic accounting team. In the meantime, you need to keep a low profile, act like everything is normal at home. We don't want him suspecting we're onto him yet. Once we have a solid case, we'll confront him with it." Legal measures were only part of Charlene's plan. She had a more personal vendetta. She wanted Oliver and Alexis to face the consequences on a social platform. After all, Oliver thrived on maintaining a polished public image as a philanthropic millionaire, and Alexis, her entire career hinged on her glamorous, envy-inducing social media persona. Charlene resolved to strike them where it would hurt the most, in public reputation. A stroke of inspiration led Charlene to her father's old diaries, which she discovered tucked away in a carved mahogany chest. George Wilkerson had meticulously recorded notes about people he did business with, favors, secrets, alliances. Reading through them, Charlene was reminded how alliances could be forged or broken with a single phone call. She discovered a longtime ally of her father's, Mark Remington, a prominent journalist with the Los Angeles Tribune. Mark and George had teamed up once to expose a crooked real estate mogul. The subsequent scandal had garnered front-page headlines, and Mark owed his career boost to George. Charlene wasn't sure if Mark would remember her, but she decided to find out. She called the Tribune, leaving a message explaining that she was George Wilkerson's daughter and needed to speak with Mark. Within an hour, she got a call back. Mark's voice was warm with reminiscence as he recounted how much her father had supported him. After exchanging pleasantries, Charlene offered Mark an exclusive story that would expose betrayal, financial misuse, and the lavish downfall of a prominent tech millionaire. Mark hesitated. "This is about Oliver Cooper, isn't it? I've seen him around, and he's something of a rising star in the business section. Are you certain you want to go public?" Charlene's throat tightened. "I'm certain, but I need your promise that this will be handled with integrity. This isn't just gossip, it's about justice and ensuring no one else gets hurt." Mark agreed to meet in person, requesting a time and place. They settled on a discreet cafe near the Tribune's office. As Charlene hung up, she felt a surge of adrenaline. It was one thing to plan revenge quietly, but quite another to involve a well-known journalist who had the power to break a career. In those days of preparatory hush, Charlene found small comfort in her unborn child's growing kicks. She allowed herself moments of calm, sometimes drifting to the nursery she had started decorating. She would stand there in the soft glow of pastel paint, letting her imagination wander to a future free from Oliver's deceit. Yet every time she saw Oliver, her resolve hardened. One late night, she heard him chatting on the phone in hushed tones, finishing with "I miss you too," before ending the call. The next morning, he cheerfully asked if she needed anything for her prenatal vitamins. The audacity left her speechless, but it also reaffirmed her mission. She would not remain a helpless victim. Oliver Cooper was not a man who ever considered himself the villain. Born to modest means in Sacramento, he had clawed his way up, starting with a partial football scholarship that got him through college. When an injury ended his sports dreams, he discovered a knack for sales and networking. He joined a tech startup, impressing investors with his bold pitches and near-fearless approach. Over time, he built his own enterprise, Cooper Innovations, attracting venture capital, forging partnerships, and eventually becoming a darling of the tech press. He prided himself on defying expectations. To Oliver, life was a game of strategy, and he believed that moral lines were negotiable if the end justified the means. Meeting Charlene Wilkerson seemed like the perfect alignment of business and pleasure. He was genuinely drawn to her kindness and sophistication, but he was also captivated by the resources she possessed. Their relationship skyrocketed his social standing. Her father's connections opened doors that would have remained locked for years. However, Oliver's appetite for success proved insatiable. He was enthralled by the power he wielded and the attention he could command, especially from women who admired his status. The day he set eyes on Alexis Hart at a high-end nightclub, desire and opportunity collided. He was bored with the predictability of marriage, or so he told himself, and Alexis represented the spark he craved. But Alexis demanded more than mere attention. She wanted designer bags, exclusive penthouse living, and the feeling of being kept by a wealthy lover. Initially, Oliver believed he could handle the financial burden. His ventures were doing well, after all. But soon, Alexis's cravings escalated. She wanted a place bigger than her old condo. She wanted jewelry that would stand out on her Instagram feed. Oliver found ways to sneak money out of joint accounts, forging invoices and funneling funds. When the news of Charlene's inheritance landed, Oliver saw a stopgap solution to maintain Alexis's extravagant tastes until he could close a few major tech deals. It was a gamble, but in his mind, he had it under control. He had no qualms about forging Charlene's signature on certain transactions or convincing her that the funds were tied up in essential expansions. He believed Charlene would never suspect. She was gentle, trusting, and occupied with her pregnancy. Little did he know, behind Charlene's calm demeanor lay the iron will of George Wilkerson's daughter. One afternoon, as he sipped a whiskey at a private lounge, Oliver scrolled through Alexis's latest Instagram photos. His chest puffed with pride at the thought of having such a dazzling woman by his side, albeit in secret. Alexis's messages demanded a new Hermes Birkin bag she had spotted. Oliver texted back with reassurance, hoping she'd remain satisfied for a while longer. Within a few minutes, Charlene called. Oliver almost didn't answer, but something in her voicemail, "We need to talk about something important," made him pick up. She requested he come home early for dinner, sounding sweet yet firm. Oliver felt a prickle of uncertainty. Charlene rarely insisted on altering his schedule, but he brushed it off, thinking perhaps she wanted to share some baby-related development. Oliver had no clue that the carefully laid trap was about to snap shut around him. He still believed he was the master of his own destiny, orchestrating two separate worlds without consequence. What he failed to realize was that his illusions were hanging by a thread, and Charlene held the scissors. Charlene decided the moment had come to set her plan in motion. With Deborah T., Carmichael's legal advice, and the mountain of evidence courtesy of Jackson Miller's investigations, she was ready to confront Oliver. She'd been hiding her fury behind sweet smiles for too long, and every day that passed felt like a betrayal of her own soul. It was a Monday evening when Oliver walked into their Beverly Hills mansion, expecting a quiet dinner. Instead, he found Charlene sitting in the living room, dressed in a simple but elegant navy blue blouse, her hair pulled back, her expression unreadable. On the table before her lay two neatly stacked piles of papers and a laptop. Oliver frowned, loosening his tie. "What's all this?" he asked, forcing a chuckle. "You look serious." Charlene gestured for him to sit. "We need to talk, Oliver. Please." He obliged, though she could see the flicker of unease in his eyes. Charlene opened the laptop, revealing photos of Oliver and Alexis shopping together, arms wrapped intimately. A slideshow advanced to screenshots of text messages, receipts from her inheritance account, and finally, the penthouse lease documents. She didn't have to say a word. The evidence spoke for itself. Oliver's face went pale. He attempted a laugh, nervous and hollow. What is this? Where did you get these?" Charlene's voice was steady, surprising even herself. "That's not the question you should be asking. You should be asking why you thought you could use my father's money to fund your mistress's lavish lifestyle." Oliver blanched, standing up in an attempt to regain control. "Let's calm down. This is a misunderstanding." Charlene rose too, a hand instinctively resting on her pregnant belly. "Don't you dare feed me that lie. I've traced every cent you took from my inheritance. I've hired a private investigator. My lawyer, Deborah Carmichael, has drawn up the legal consequences of your actions. Everything is right there." She pointed at the second stack of documents that outlined a potential lawsuit for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of trust. Oliver tried to speak, but he choked on his words, finally managing a feeble apology. "I never meant to hurt you. I just needed time. I was going to replace the money." His excuses sounded pitiful, even to himself. Charlene's eyes flashed with anger. "My father's money was meant for charity, Oliver. And if that wasn't enough, you brought another woman into our marriage. I'm pregnant with your child, and this is how you repay me." He stepped forward, arms outstretched, but Charlene recoiled. "Don't," she warned, her tone sharper than ever before. For a moment, guilt and panic flooded his face. He started to stammer. "We can fix this. I'll leave her, pay you back. It was just a mistake, a fling." Charlene's hollow laugh cut through his words. "A fling that cost me millions of dollars and my trust. Don't you dare trivialize this." Oliver looked around helplessly, scanning the room like a trapped animal. He saw the unwavering determination in Charlene's posture and realized how dire his situation truly was. She wasn't the naive, trusting heiress he'd married. She was George Wilkerson's daughter, a woman with the resources and willpower to ruin him. Before Oliver could plead further, Charlene handed him an envelope. Inside was a formal letter from Deborah's firm outlining Charlene's conditions: immediate return of all misused funds, complete severance from Alexis Hart, and an agreement that, if Oliver didn't comply, Charlene would file a lawsuit and expose him publicly. Oliver's hands shook as he read. Beads of sweat broke out on his forehead. He tried to muster defiance, but the weight of Charlene's evidence and the potential fallout was immense. If the press got hold of this, his business could collapse, investors might bail, and his once venerated public image would be shattered. Swallowing hard, he finally spoke in a subdued voice. "I'll do what it takes. Just give me a chance to fix this." Charlene didn't respond, her glare cold enough to freeze him in place. Then she stood, taking one final look at the man she once believed was her life partner. Without another word, she left the room, the quiet click of her heels echoing in Oliver's ears. The once invincible entrepreneur sank into the nearest chair, realizing the gravity of what he had done. His illusions were no more. The facade lay in pieces around him. Word traveled fast in certain circles, especially among the wealthy. Alexis Hart sensed something was off the moment. Oliver declined to accompany her to a high-profile after-party. He had always jumped at the chance to show her off, to revel in the attention their illicit romance garnered. Now he was distant, texting her curt replies that lacked his usual over-the-top affection. Their next face-to-face encounter took place at the penthouse Oliver funded. Alexis had arranged a private chef to cook dinner, hoping to create a romantic ambiance. She lounged in a silk robe, sipping champagne while she waited. But when Oliver arrived, tense and brooding, the sparks she usually felt fizzled into concern. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sultry but tinged with worry. Oliver paced the room, ignoring the tantalizing smell of garlic and rosemary wafting from the kitchen. He finally turned to her. "Charlene found out," he said simply, face drawn. Alexis's eyes widened. She'd always feared this day might come, but she had grown complacent, believing Oliver had it all under control. "So what? You can smooth things over, right?" He shook his head, running a hand through his hair. "It's worse than that. She's threatening legal action and public exposure. I could lose everything, my company, my reputation. She wants the money back, Alexis. Millions of dollars." Alexis's mouth fell open. She was not just an idle bystander in this drama. If Oliver's finances were frozen or compromised, she'd lose the lifestyle she'd grown to love. "What about me?" she demanded, voice sharp with panic. "We have a lease here. Is she shutting that down too?" Oliver nodded grimly. "Yes, she wants me to cut ties immediately." Alexis's lip curled in frustration. She had no intention of giving up her penthouse or the benefits she reaped from being Oliver's mistress. She'd invested time in him, in their brand of secrecy, and she wasn't about to watch it vanish. "Then fight her," Alexis snapped. "Hire the best lawyers. She can't just ruin your life because of a marital spat." Oliver laughed bitterly. "Marital spat? You don't understand. She has evidence of misappropriating her inheritance. She can press charges. The court will side with her, and I'll be labeled a thief." Alexis's expression hardened. Fear and anger churned within her. "You told me you had this under control, that your marriage was more of a facade, and you could get the money whenever you wanted." He flinched. "It's complicated, Alexis. Charlene's father was a powerful man, and she inherited not just money, but influence. People are lining up to help her, and she's pregnant with my child. Even the optics of that are damning for me." Something unreadable flickered in Alexis's eyes, perhaps a momentary guilt. Then, just as swiftly, it was replaced by self-preservation. "What do you plan to do? Beg her forgiveness? Maybe you should just divorce her. Then we can finally be together openly." Oliver glared at her, frustration welling up. "Don't you get it? A divorce would be a nightmare right now. She'd drag me through the courts, and I'd lose all support from my investors. They don't want to be associated with scandal. And with the baby on the way, she'd get sympathy, and I'd be a pariah." Alexis sighed, sinking onto the tufted velvet couch. "Fine, you handle the legal mess. But don't expect me to sit around waiting. I have to protect my own interests." Oliver stared at her, realization dawning that Alexis's devotion was as conditional as her lifestyle was extravagant. He had hoped for support, maybe an embrace that would ease his anxiety. Instead, her cold practicality only underscored the fact that she was with him for what he could provide. "I can't keep funding everything," he admitted, voice weary. "Charlene wants the money returned. I'll try to stall, but eventually I have to close deals to pay back what I took." Alexis's expression darkened at the suggestion that the money flow might stop. She rose, crossing her arms. "You'd better figure out a way to fix this, Oliver. I'm not going back to some dingy apartment or giving up the lifestyle I've built. If you let her win, you'll lose me too." Her ultimatum hit him like a slap. He realized that in his quest for success and pleasure, he'd bound himself to two demanding women, one with legitimate moral and legal standing, and the other with a voracious appetite for luxury. As Alexis retreated to the bedroom, slamming the door behind her, Oliver sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. In that moment, he felt the walls closing in. There was no easy path forward. If he complied with Charlene, Alexis would likely walk away, leaving him high and dry. If he fought Charlene, he risked public disgrace and possible legal ruin. Faced with these impossible choices, Oliver finally understood that his empire built on lies and grand illusions was on the brink of collapse. While Oliver floundered, Charlene assembled a circle of support that fortified her resolve. She confided in Laura Wilkerson, her trusted cousin and friend, who offered emotional solace and practical help. Laura connected Charlene with a public relations consultant, Samantha Layton, well known for handling high-profile scandals. Samantha had a polished demeanor, her every word measured as she addressed Charlene's concerns in her sleek downtown office. "Your story is compelling," Samantha noted, scanning the summary of Charlene's predicament. A pregnant heiress, betrayed by her husband, who used her inheritance to spoil a mistress. It's headline gold, But we must manage the narrative carefully, or it could spiral out of control. Charlene nodded. I don't want to be seen as vindictive, but I need justice, and I won't stand by while my father's legacy is exploited for someone else's greed. Samantha offered a small smile. Understood. We'll position you as a woman standing up for her unborn child's future and safeguarding charitable interests. This is about more than revenge, it's about principle. Meanwhile, Deborah Carmichael was finalizing the legal angle. She arranged a meeting with Oliver's lawyers to present Charlene's demands: immediate repayment of the stolen funds, a transfer of any assets purchased with her inheritance back to her name, and a formal separation agreement that protected Charlene from any further financial wrongdoing. If Oliver refused, a lawsuit would proceed. Charlene was also preparing for her clandestine meeting with Mark Remington, the journalist. She knew that if Oliver tried to strong-arm her or manipulate public sentiment, she would have an ally in the press. Late one afternoon, she slipped on a simple beige trench coat, pulled her hair into a low ponytail, and headed to a small cafe near the Los Angeles Tribune's office. Mark Remington was already seated at a corner table, nursing a cappuccino. He stood when he saw her, greeting her with a warm handshake. Charlene recognized the lines of age and experience around his eyes, a testament to his years in investigative journalism. They spoke in subdued tones, Charlene handing him sanitized versions of the evidence photos, financial documents, text message screenshots. Mark skimmed through them, occasionally raising an eyebrow. "This is thorough," he remarked. "If this goes public, Oliver Cooper's reputation will take a massive hit, possibly irreversible." Charlene exhaled shakily. "I'm aware. I don't relish destroying him, but he left me no choice. I won't let him or his mistress keep benefiting from my father's legacy." Mark leaned in, eyes earnest. "I'll do this story justice. I owe your father a lot, and I respect you for how you're handling this. Just be prepared. Once it's out there, you can't control every headline." Charlene nodded. She knew the risk, but it was one she was willing to take. In the days that followed, Charlene continued her routine as if nothing were amiss. She attended prenatal yoga sessions, visited her doctor, and occasionally appeared at society luncheons. Yet beneath the surface calm, she was orchestrating the downfall of the man who had wronged her. Oliver sensed her quiet determination, and it made him restless. He spent hours on the phone with potential investors, desperate to secure funds to repay Charlene. But rumors started swirling that Oliver Cooper was in financial trouble, and potential backers grew wary. Alexis grew impatient too. She posted cryptic messages on social media about undying love, turning into betrayal, likely aimed at stirring sympathy. But the more her followers asked questions, the more Alexis retreated into cryptic silence, perhaps realizing that Charlene's wrath could explode any day now. And so the stage was set. Charlene stood, strong and resolute, armed with legal, PR, and journalistic firepower. Oliver flailed between desperation and denial, while Alexis feared losing her golden goose. The world outside remained oblivious for the moment, but soon the carefully constructed illusions would crumble in a blaze of public scandal. Charlene could almost taste the retribution, and she knew it would be served cold. The unraveling began on a crisp Wednesday morning when the Los Angeles Tribune ran a front-page teaser: high-profile tech entrepreneur accused of misusing wife's inheritance. Though the article did not name Oliver directly, those in elite circles recognized the clues pointing to Cooper innovations. Within hours, social media started buzzing. The cryptic references matched rumors of Oliver's recent desperation to secure funds, and the name Charlene Wilkerson Cooper trended on local Twitter feeds. Paparazzi camped outside their mansion, trying to capture the first shots of the wealthy heiress at the center of the scandal. Oliver woke to a barrage of phone calls and texts from colleagues, investors, and even relatives who had read the story. He rushed downstairs, where Charlene calmly sipped tea at the dining room table, a copy of the Los Angeles Tribune laid out next to her plate. "What did you do?" he demanded, voice hoarse. She met his gaze unflinching. "I gave them the truth," she said simply. He inhaled sharply. "You've put my entire company at risk. Do you know how this makes me look?" Charlene stood, her pregnant belly prominent beneath her blouse. "Yes, I do. And you're the one who put us here. Now it's time to face the consequences." Oliver shook his head in disbelief. Before he could say more, his phone rang again. He retreated to his study, slamming the door behind him. Charlene could hear his muffled voice, shouting something about media spin and damage control. By midday, a second wave of online articles appeared, some even naming Alexis Hart as a possible mistress. Alexis's Instagram followers flooded her posts with questions. Instead of responding, Alexis turned off comments, fueling further speculation. Soon, national gossip columns picked up the story, hungry to showcase a salacious tale of betrayal and scandal. Charlene's phone buzzed incessantly with messages of support from friends and family, plus the occasional harassing call from curious strangers. Laura Wilkerson came by to check on Charlene, offering to help manage the chaos. Meanwhile, Samantha Layton, Charlene's PR consultant, was busy issuing statements. Mrs. Cooper prioritizes her unborn child's well-being and is cooperating fully with legal proceedings to reclaim misused funds. She remains committed to charitable initiatives, despite the challenging circumstances. Investors in Cooper Innovations began to panic. Some threatened to pull out if Oliver did not address the allegations immediately and clear his name. Desperate to salvage his company, Oliver arranged a press conference for the following day at a luxury hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Charlene stayed silent that evening, ignoring Oliver's attempts to discuss strategy. She retired to the nursery, gently running her hands over the crib she had picked out weeks ago, her mind replaying the chain of events that led them to this precipice. Though she felt a twinge of sorrow for the public nature of the scandal, her conviction held firm Oliver had to be held accountable. That night, the media frenzy exploded. Popular talk shows hosted panels discussing the riches to rags angle, speculation about prenups, and the morality of Oliver's actions. On one late-night show, a comedian quipped, "Misusing your pregnant wife's inheritance to fund a mistress? In LA, that's like trying to swim with sharks while bleeding. Bad idea." Charlene went to bed early, telling herself that tomorrow would be the beginning of the end. As she switched off the lights, she felt the baby kick and whispered a promise to her child, "This chaos won't define us. I'll make sure of it." Outside, the press huddled in clusters, cameras flashing whenever a light turned on in the windows. Inside, the once luxurious fortress felt like a cage of secrets and sorrow. And somewhere across town, Alexis Hart watched her phone, dread filling her heart as she realized she was not merely a bystander, she was about to be publicly named and shamed as well. The next morning, Oliver stood behind a podium in the opulent ballroom of the Regency Hotel. He wore a tailored suit, trying to project calm authority, yet his hands shook as he adjusted the microphone. Rows of reporters, photographers, and camera crews filled the space, waiting to broadcast his statement live. Charlene opted not to attend in person. Instead, she watched the live stream from the comfort of her father's study, with Laura by her side. It wasn't her place to shield Oliver from the consequences. This was his mess. Clearing his throat, Oliver began, "I'd like to address the recent allegations circulating in the media. First, I want to make it clear that I have the utmost respect for my wife, Charlene Cooper, and her family legacy. Any suggestion that I have intentionally misappropriated funds is premature and not based on the full facts. His speech was carefully scripted, peppered with phrases like misunderstanding and temporary financial reallocation. He dodged direct mention of Alexis Hart, only vaguely referring to private matters that do not concern the public. Reporters unleashed a flurry of questions. Is it true you used your wife's inheritance for personal gain? Have you been unfaithful to your wife, who is pregnant with your child? What about the penthouse property leased in Alexis Hart's name? Oliver's calm facade began to crack. He tried to deflect, insisting that no wrongdoing occurred, but the wave of skepticism was overwhelming. The final straw came when a tenacious reporter from a local affiliate stood up and said, "We have documents showing your signature authorizing transfers from your wife's inheritance to fund the lease of Miss Hart's penthouse." "Care to comment?" Oliver stammered. The entire ballroom seemed to collectively hold its breath. Finally he mumbled, "I have no comment on Miss Hart's personal finances." Camera shutters clicked frantically, capturing the moment. Online, viewers mocked him on social media for his non-denial. Memes sprouted, picturing Oliver's sweaty brow next to the tagline, "No comment." From the study, Charlene watched, feeling an odd mix of triumph and sadness. This was the father of her child, after all, and seeing him humiliated publicly was bittersweet. But she reminded herself of the betrayal, the stolen money, and the mistress. Actions had consequences, and Oliver was finally facing his. After the press conference, Oliver fled the hotel amidst jeering questions. His phone lit up with missed calls and messages from business partners. He tried calling Charlene, but she didn't pick up. When she finally checked her messages, there was one tearful voicemail from Oliver, begging for a chance to talk. She ignored it, letting her lawyer Deborah handle all formal communications. News coverage that evening was brutal, with every network dissecting Oliver's shaky performance. Some panelists predicted a swift downfall for Cooper Innovations. Stocks tied to his ventures took a hit as anxious investors bailed. Meanwhile, tabloids emblazoned images of Alexis, dredging up her modeling past and speculation about her connection to Oliver. At a small bar on the outskirts of town, Alexis Hart watched the broadcast with a sinking feeling. A friend tapped her shoulder sympathetically, but Alexis shrugged it off, her mind whirling. She realized her chance of forging a respectable public image was slipping away. She cursed Oliver for his failure to control the narrative. In the hours that followed, Charlene received a supportive call from Mark Remington at the Los Angeles Tribune. "Well, that was quite the show," he remarked. "Are you satisfied?" Charlene sighed. "It's not over yet, but this is the start of him taking responsibility. Thank you for exposing the story with integrity, Mark." He wished her well, and Charlene ended the call, sinking back into the leather chair in her father's study. Laura squeezed her hand, offering a gentle smile. "You did the right thing," Laura said. "Your father would be proud." Exhausted, Charlene allowed herself a rare moment of vulnerability. She knew she was forever changed by this ordeal, but as she stroked her belly, she silently vowed that her child's life would be built on honesty, love, and dignity, everything Oliver had so woefully betrayed. In the wake of Oliver's disastrous press conference, Alexis Hart found herself at the center of a spiraling scandal. Hounded by trolls and abandoned by sponsors, she hid in the penthouse, watching her once glamorous life crumble. She repeatedly called Oliver, but he offered no solutions. His resources were now diverted to crisis management. Desperate, Alexis agreed to an exclusive tabloid interview, hoping to salvage her reputation. Her plan backfired spectacularly. She stumbled over her lies, contradicting herself on camera and exposing how deeply she'd known about Charlene's inheritance. The public turned on her, mocking her attempts at portraying herself as a victim. Brands cut ties, and her agent dropped her altogether. Realizing she had lost her golden ticket, Alexis packed up the designer items Oliver had bought her. With a final, scornful text to him, "I'm done. Good luck with your mess." She fled Los Angeles, leaving behind a ruinous legacy as the mistress who fell from grace. With Alexis gone, Oliver found himself cornered, facing a wife armed with an army of attorneys and a brewing lawsuit that threatened to dismantle his entire empire. Deborah T. Carmichael finalized the formal complaint, detailing every instance of financial misappropriation. The documents demanded full restitution, punitive damages, and legal fees. Charlene sent Oliver a final ultimatum through Deborah: settle out of court under these terms or face a very public trial. The settlement terms included: 1. Immediate transfer of any remaining misused funds back to Charlene's account. 2. Liquidation of certain Cooper Innovations assets to repay her inheritance. 3. A public apology and acknowledgement of wrongdoing. 4. An agreement that Charlene would maintain full custody of their unborn child, with Oliver having supervised visitation unless future court orders stipulated otherwise. Oliver balked at the custody demand, but even he recognized he had no leverage left. His name was mud in the media, investors were distancing themselves, and every day brought new rumors about potential lawsuits from minority shareholders who felt misled. At a final negotiation session, Oliver arrived looking haggard, dark circles under his eyes, his once confident posture deflated. Charlene sat across a mahogany table, Deborah by her side. The tension in the air was palpable. "What do you want from me?" Oliver asked, voice hollow. "My company is in shambles. I can't magically produce millions overnight." Charlene stared at him, remembering the charming suitor who once vowed eternal devotion. That man was gone, replaced by a shell. "Figure it out," she replied coldly. "Sell your shares. Downsize operations, do whatever it takes. I'm not responsible for your choices." Oliver's eyes flickered with a mixture of shame and desperation. He turned to Deborah, attempting to negotiate the custody terms, but Charlene stood firm. "My child will not be subjected to your toxic lifestyle. Earn the right to be in their life again." Deborah slid the settlement papers across the table. Oliver took a shaky breath and scribbled his signature. The weight of finality descended on the room. From her seat, Charlene tried to steady the tremor in her hand. She had envisioned a different future, a family united, love thriving, but life had taken a cruel turn. Outside the firm's office, paparazzi snapped photos, capturing Oliver's defeated expression. He muttered a short no comment before ducking into a waiting car. Charlene followed after some moments, her composure intact. She had just won a crucial victory, but her heart felt heavy. Still, she reminded herself that this step was necessary to secure her baby's future. The stolen inheritance would be reclaimed, Oliver would be forced to atone, and the public had seen the truth of his betrayal. As the legal dust began to settle, Charlene could see the road ahead, one that involved single motherhood, healing, and rebuilding her life free from deceit. Now, only the final chapter remained, turning this painful saga into something meaningful, not just for her, but for the causes her father cared about. Charlene intended to ensure that out of the ashes of this scandal, a brighter, more hopeful legacy would shine. With the legal battles behind her, Charlene left the Beverly Hills mansion, unable to face its haunting memories. Instead, she found comfort in a smaller Ocean View penthouse. There, she poured her reclaimed inheritance into something meaningful, the George Wilkerson Sanctuary for Mothers. Housed in a restored downtown building, it offered safe shelter, medical care, and job training for expectant women in need. At the sanctuary's opening ceremony, Charlene stood before a modest crowd. Months of scandal and heartbreak had led her here, but she felt more empowered than ever. She publicly honored her late father's legacy, vowing that the foundation would extend hope to those most vulnerable. Oliver Cooper, left reeling by his downfall, sold off parts of Cooper Innovations to repay what he'd taken. He sent Charlene a letter admitting regret and asked to see their child someday. She didn't respond immediately. Trust would take time to rebuild, if ever. Eventually, Charlene welcomed a healthy baby girl, Georgina, named after her father. Holding her daughter in the hospital's soft morning light, Charlene was filled with renewed hope. She had survived betrayal and public scrutiny, emerging with a clear purpose to raise her child in a world guided by honesty, compassion, and her father's enduring spirit. And so ends the tumultuous tale of wealth, betrayal, and justice. Charlene's world was turned upside down when her husband, Oliver, funneled her inheritance into a luxury lifestyle with his mistress, Alexis. Yet, through heartbreak, legal warfare, and a media storm, Charlene found her resolve. She reclaimed not just her father's legacy, but her own power and dignity. Oliver and Alexis paid the ultimate price, public humiliation and shattered reputations, forced to face the consequences of their selfish desires. Charlene emerged stronger, dedicating her restored fortune to a cause that honored her father's memory. Even as a single mother, she found purpose in nurturing new life, her baby girl, Georgina, and helping vulnerable mothers in need. This story reminds us that while betrayal can strike like a thief in the night, resilience and truth can vanquish even the darkest lies. If you found this real-life drama gripping, please like, share, and subscribe to support more captivating stories on this channel. Share Charlene's journey, and let's inspire others to stand up for justice. Your support helps us continue creating compelling content.